Since October 7th, Israel has killed over 273 journalists in Gaza, most of them Palestinians. This is the highest death toll ever recorded in a single conflict. With international media barred from entry, these journalists have been our eyes and ears on the ground. They bore witness for all of us. They paid the ultimate price to cover horrific events. This episode is dedicated to Anas al-Sharif, his colleagues, and all the journalists who've lost their lives reporting from the front line. Hi, I'm Zara Kozema, and this is There's a List, an investigative podcast by Ricochet Media that digs into the systematic surveillance and doxing of pro-Palestinian voices in Canada. In the first two episodes, we heard from students, academics, and professionals targeted by Canary Mission, a blacklist with deep-pocketed American backers. Today, we're focusing on a group right here in Canada. This episode is called The Target, and this time, the aim's on journalists. So I'm sitting in what's proved to be a very noisy cafe in Leslieville, a hip neighborhood in Toronto, waiting for Iman. Iman's also a journalist.
Hey, Sarah. Iman.
Nice to meet you,
Nice to meet
Zara.
you.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Wonderful.
Do you want to something?
Iman spent 10 years in the North working for Indigenous media before moving to Montreal. She has what the kids called great drip and immaculate vibes.
And I know this is a podcast, so I am tattooed, fully tattooed. I have piercings, I have short hair, and I do not look conservative, like a traditional conservative news anchor, especially.
In the fall of 2021, Iman's employer, CTV Montreal, sent her to cover a protest where Montrealers gathered in support of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs who were in a standoff with the RCMP and the Coastal GasLink Company in British Columbia. These protests were happening nationwide. Here's what it sounded like in Treaty 6 territory, known as Edmonton, that same month.
Not okay to arrest people when they are standing up for their sovereign inherent rights to protect their land, their water, and their relationship.
Always working Indigenous land. When I say land, you say that. Land! Land! Pipelines, no prison! Freedom for our children! No pipelines, no prison! Freedom for our children! Again, sacred water, sacred land! Hands off the soldiers! Sacred water, sacred land! Hands off the soldiers! Sacred water, sacred land!
So I do my story. In the story, I interviewed a young man who, it was such a beautiful imagery. He was wearing an orange, you know the orange flag that says every child matters with the feathers on it? So he was wearing that as a cape, was wearing a keffiyeh, and had a Palestinian flag in his hand, you know? And I interviewed him, and the clip that I ended up using to go to air, he said something along the lines of, the least I can do as a visitor to this land is support the first people of this land. What a beautiful clip, what beautiful imagery. It went to air, and
The response was incredible.
so many people in my newsroom filled my inbox with congratulations. Wow, Iman, you turned like a rudimentary basic story into something so interesting. It was so compelling. Wow, what a joy, you know? I was like, wow, great, thank you so much.
But not everyone felt that way.
The next morning, I wake up to an onslaught of hate. I was like, where is this coming from? Because it was all coming from private individual email addresses, with sometimes different subject lines. Here we're talking like 30 or 40 a day, showing a keffiyeh is anti-Semitic, or having that voice is slanted biased journalism, which obviously I disagree. But
Iman had been targeted by HonestReporting Canada, a group that claims to expose bias in media coverage of Israel for her protest story. In practice, they monitor coverage, post write-ups, and rally their 70,000 plus supporters to contact journalists and newsrooms. In Iman's case, they posted her face, her email, and her Twitter handle, and called on their followers to condemn her reporting.
Some of them said they hope I never, ever have children or are responsible for teaching the next generation. Other emails threatened me, called me an it, told me to get gender reassignment surgery, didn't know my gender. There were a couple there that said, we know where you live. That was the part that got really scary. There was racism, homophobia, transphobia.
At this time, Iman didn't know where all this was coming from, so she just forwarded the hate mail she was getting to management.
It wasn't until later that evening that a colleague sent me the link to Honest Reporting. I had never heard of Honest Reporting before. And they're like, Iman, don't worry, it happens to everyone in the newsroom. They're insidious, they literally target everybody. And I was like, but that's not okay. Where's the policy? Where's the anti-harassment policy? Anti-toxic speech support system? You know, everyone must have one of these by now, right? And they're like, no, not at all. It's just part of the job, Iman, just grin and bear it.
Iman decided to do just that and not go to the police. She felt that she did not have support from her newsroom and she wasn't sure who or what she could report. Within a few weeks, the harassment died down. And then, about a year later, Iman discovered the story had quietly disappeared from the site.
When I realized that the story was taken down, I was in complete disbelief. Complete disbelief. That's not something we do. From what I've always known about our ethics and our code of journalism, you never remove a piece of journalism from history. That is the archive of history. You can change it, you can issue a correction, you can, republish whatever. You don't remove it.
CTV's editorial standards state that we do not, except in very narrow circumstances, unpublish articles or video. We only consider removal requests in very exceptional circumstances. This may include legal considerations or where the named person is facing genuine threats of physical harm. Any decision to remove content must be weighed against the public's right to know and the historical record, and only after consultation with senior news management, who will make the final decision after considering all these issues, including legal ramifications. If the circumstances for removal are so narrow, what made Iman's story qualify for removal? Did someone request for the video's removal? Was the newsroom facing legal ramifications over publishing the image of a khufiya? Was someone in the video facing physical threats? How was all of this weighed against the public's right to know? Concerned about how the decision was made, Iman reached out to management for answers. She pulled out her phone to show me.
Okay, this was one of the last emails I got from the news director in Montreal. From what we can see, your video and web copy were pulled down December 3rd, 2021. Since more than 2 years have lapsed, it is impossible to know with certainty, but it appears it was an exceptional decision to protect you from online criticism.
The story was removed less than a month later to protect Iman. But Iman wasn't afraid of online criticism.
You don't protect somebody through erasure, through silencing them and through erasure. I wanted my company to stand up for me and to stand behind the story that they vetted, that I wrote, I interviewed, I chased, I produced, and they vetted, and they aired. As a team, I wanted them to stand behind me and send HRC a cease and desist letter.
A cease and desist letter, loosely put, is a formal stop-it notice. It tells the recipient to immediately stop doing something that's harmful and possibly illegal. It also warns them to not start again.
It's Canadian media taking a stand against billionaire-funded lobby groups trying to strong-arm the media. And it supports your journalists. We need support, we need validation. We don't need silencing and erasure. We don't need this sort of paternalistic, quote-unquote, protection.
But CTV Montreal didn't, and lost Iman. She quit the very same day.
I was the only QT BIPOC from a religious minority that was in that newsroom. I know how easy it would be to cancel me, to fire me, to give me desk duty again. To threaten me with insubordination again. I know how much people like me fight inside the newsroom. I I was really trying to just abide by the rules. To go public with this story while still hired by CTV News, they'd fire me. To push management anymore, they'd fire me. So I did all the right things, quote unquote right things, according to what HR wants you to do. This is such an ethical issue. This is such a breach of the ethics of journalism, the journalism that I want to be a part of.
It's no secret that Canadian newsrooms have long practiced what some call the Palestine exception, a pattern of bias and suppression when it comes to Palestinian voices and perspectives. An analysis by The Breach of CTV's first year of coverage after October 7th found that its national news gave Israeli voices 62% more airtime than Palestinian ones. It aired racist stereotypes about Arabs and let Israeli military officials make false claims without challenge. But journalists like Iman have been pushing back. She and several colleagues published their stories in a new book, When Genocide Wasn't News, an anthology that reveals the degrees to which Canadian media whitewashes Israeli violence, dehumanizes Palestinians, and smears a growing protest movement. On the other side of the fight are organizations like Honest Reporting and its Canadian branch, HonestReporting Canada, which work to actively target newsrooms and reporters who center Palestinian perspectives. Take Ricochet Media's podcast, In Bed with the Elephant, for example. They came after our host, Adrian Harewood, for interviewing Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. HRC called the conversation one-sided and rallied their followers to shame Adrian. Honest Reporting Canada was founded in 2003, and for a long time it was just one guy calling the shots. Unlike Canary Mission, we know his name. It's Mike Fiegelman. He's the executive director of the charity he calls a digital army for Israel, fighting anti-Israel bias in Canadian media. On its website, it boasts prompting hundreds of apologies, retractions, and revisions from news outlets. Efforts, it says, are changing the face of the media and reporting of Israel and Jewish issues. But when you look closer at the success stories on their website, a different picture emerges. One where they pressure overworked and understaffed outlets to tweak or retract stories, often in ways that dilute, sanitize, or erase reporting on Palestinian suffering and settler colonial violence. Here's how it works. HRC pumps out media alerts whenever they spot coverage they don't like. They send these to their audience with a simple call to action. Email or tweet the journalist or the publication, demand a correction, an apology, and sometimes even a retraction. In the years leading up to October 2023, this was happening regularly. A headline change here, a word swap there, a quiet clarification added after the fact. In April 2023, CBC Radio ran a segment describing Gaza as occupied.
More violence, more rockets, more confrontation. For the second night in a row, Israeli police have raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Hundreds have been arrested, and the Red Crescent Society says multiple people have been injured. On both nights, rockets have been fired into Israel from Hamas-controlled territory in occupied Gaza. As Margaret Evans reports, the growing conflict is...
Hours after HRC intervened, the CBC issued an on-air correction.
Last night, we made a reference to the Gaza Strip being occupied. The territory is not occupied, but rather has its borders controlled by Israel and Egypt.
Legal experts and international bodies have repeatedly pointed out that Israel's control over Gaza meets the definition of military occupation. After October 7th, HRC's campaign became more frequent and aggressive. Coverage that centered Palestinian suffering or questioned Israel's military response was suddenly labeled misinformation, bias, or even terror apologia. In 2023, HRC publicly celebrated when Palestinian journalist Zahra Al-Aqras was fired from Global News. HRC accused Zahra of anti-Semitism for sharing posts about Palestinian suffering on her personal social media. This is her talking about what happened and why in an interview in 2023.
My employer told me my post about Palestine made me look unbalanced, and that violates the company's policy about posting specifically about Palestine. I was basically sharing the atrocities Israel has been committing about Palestinians and criticizing how the Western media were covering the issue of Palestinians.
In some cases, HRC has pushed for entire guest segments or op-eds to be pulled when they criticize Israeli policy. And they make it easy, with pre-written complaint forms ready to fire off to editors. It's like sociology professor and activist Cheryl Nessel said.
There's a chill around that whole area.
Hey, it's me again. You're listening to There's a List, an investigative podcast from Ricochet Media. Reporting on stories like this is only possible because of listener support. Ricochet is an independent, non-profit newsroom. We don't have corporate support or billionaire backing, which means we can dig into powerful institutions and ask questions others won't. If you value in-depth reporting on how Palestinian voices in Canada are being targeted, and you want to see more independent journalism like this, please consider supporting us. Even a few dollars a month makes a difference. Head to ricochet.media/donate. That's ricochet.media/donate to become a monthly supporter today.
Honest Reporting also does do work, jumps off of work that the Canary Mission does. It basically targets and puts a back on journalists. However, Canadian media outlets still treat this organization as some sort of good faith actor when they're not. They are a nefarious organization that targets Canadian journalists.
This is Samira Mohyeddin.
I'm a Toronto-based journalist and was a former host and producer at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation for nearly a decade. I'm currently the founder and editor-in-chief of On the Line Media.
Samira has been repeatedly targeted by Honest Reporting Canada. In one of their recent attacks, they accused her of lashing out at the Jewish state in an op-ed she wrote for the Globe and Mail. The article was about the Iranians' fight for freedom without being bombed by Israel and its allies. Iran's health ministry noted that over 600 people were killed and almost 5,000 were injured during Israel's attack on the country earlier this year. At least 28 people were killed in Iran's retaliation strikes on Israel.
They were upset that, they get upset that we still have a platform. They get upset that the Globe and Mail publishes my work. This bothers them, right? So they want to make sure that the Globe and Mail will never publish another op-ed from me. That is the main objective of these people. I mean, the whole point of these attacks is to try and silence you.
HRC's biggest attack on Samira came in 2021, over food. Back then, Samira produced a show called Unforked for the CBC.
So it's a very, very, very busy Saturday night, and I'm juggling a million things at our family restaurant. As I'm figuring all of this out in my head, out of the corner of my eye, I spot some regulars who've just been seated. They introduce me to a friend of theirs who's visiting from Israel, and they tell me they're jazzed to introduce him to Persian cuisine. The visitor from Israel points to an item on our menu and says, "This is an Israeli salad." Now, it's a simple diced tomato, cucumber, and onion salad, finished with a little bit of lemon and olive oil. And a lot of other places use those same three ingredients with minor variations. He just keeps insisting, though, that we should call it an Israeli salad. This is Unforked, picking apart the food we eat to reveal the culture and politics baked into it. I'm your host and maitre d', Samira Mohyeddin.
In this episode about gastronationalism, Samira and a producer put together a panel of Arabs and Israelis to talk about hummus, the delicious chickpea dip, and why people get so fired up in claiming certain foods as their own. At one point, a Palestinian guest says,
"A lot of the early Jewish settlers and Zionists, it was a matter of wanting to put roots on the ground and culturally, kind of immersing themselves in the land of Palestine, but rejecting the people behind the culture. I can't even travel in my own land, right, to eat hummus in a lot of these places. So that's kind of sums up."
The Israeli sociologist agrees that hummus is Palestinian.
I completely agree with the political analysis.
And this is something that really bothered Zionists, particularly the organization Honest Reporting Canada. And so they came after me, they came after the show, and this launched a internal investigation at the CBC about Unforked.
Samira went through meeting after meeting where higher-ups asked how the episode possibly went to air, even though it had been rigorously vetted. Ultimately, the CBC's ombudsman found that the episode fell short on balance. Its setup promised a debate, but both guests largely agreed. Still, most of the complainants' claims, including allegations of denying Jewish history, were rejected.
People bow down to this altar of balance, whereas I'm just a food program, and I'm talking about chickpeas, olive oil, lemon, and tahini. That is the absurdity of it. It is wild. Wild.
This is when Samira realized the severity of the chilling effect in newsrooms.
We use the word chilling effect, but it really just creates a situation where you start to self-censor, where you think to yourself, I don't want to be that journalist. I don't want to be seen as the problem. So you start to just not even pitch stories on Israel-Palestine. It really made me understand that I need to keep doing this, because there is a problem here, an endemic, systemic issue within the Canadian media landscape when it comes to Israel-Palestine.
After October 7th, Samira took to her personal social media to give context about Gaza's history and the ongoing occupation. At one point, she called out Ilan Levy, a former Israeli spokesperson, accusing him of falsifying tweets. Her seniors asked her again and again to stop. But Samira was furious at the injustice in Palestine, and she wasn't interested in playing what she calls a game of tiptoeing around the truth.
What we like to do is play the game of Israel says, and that becomes journalism. When Russia bombs somewhere, we don't use euphemisms. We name the perpetrator. Russia strikes. But it's very rare to see Israel in a headline. We use the word famine. This isn't a famine. This is engineered starvation. So the obfuscation that happens, the euphemisms, the whole mental gymnastics that we play with words to not accuse Israel of what it's actually doing is the problem. And it really has brought the credibility of our craft into disrepute in a way that I really don't think will ever be regained.
And as for Honest Reporting Canada,
if you have to tell people that you're honest, you're probably not.
We contacted CTV Montreal, Global News, and CBC News for comment multiple times. The Senior Director of Journalistic Standards and Public Trust at the CBC, Bassem Bushra, refused to take part in an interview regarding Honest Reporting Canada and the targeting of CBC journalists. CBC's new ombudsman, Maxine Bertrand, said that she could not comment on her predecessor's cases when we asked about the decision regarding Samira's homeless episode. CTV Montreal did not respond to our request for interview, where we asked about the details of Iman's case and requested a copy of her video they took down. Global News did not respond to our request for clarification of Zara's termination. Honest Reporting Canada and Mike Fiegelman did not respond to our request for interview or answer any of our questions. Next time on There's a List, we follow Honest Reporting Canada's money trail. Then, an expert explains the loopholes through which Zionist charities operate.
They function as a massive charity. They give charitable tax breaks. They operate with hundreds of thousands of dollars a year of funding. Particularly in the last 2 years, funding has been very good.
It goes all over the map, from money funding expansion in the illegal settlements, money funding intermediaries focused on Palestinian displacement and erasure, money moving to material and financial support to the Israeli military.
There is a list. This list, in Arabic, this list says we are in an operation. The operation against Israel started in the 7th of October. This is a Guardian list where every terrorist writes his name and every terrorist has his own shift guarding the people that were here.
There's a List is written and produced by me, Zara Kozema, and published by Ricochet Media. My editor is Andrea Houston. The executive producer is Ethan Cox. Jawad Al-Bidawi is the technical producer. Sarah Abdul made the gorgeous cover and episode art. This podcast has been possible through the generous support of Journalists for Human Rights. A huge thanks to Iman and Samira for speaking to me. If you want to hear more from Samira, you can check out On the Line Media on YouTube. Thanks for listening.